Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the NRW. I'm your host, Rob Medina, and I thank you all very much for joining me here today because today I'm going to be reviewing the movie, The Getback. This is a Tubi original film that came out on the platform back on May 19th. And I was actually really excited about this movie because I am a big fan of the co-writer of this film, who is also the executive producer in this movie too, in Chad Law, who's done work of films that I've reviewed here on the channel for Daylight End, which is a film I absolutely love. Section A, which is another film that he had written as well too and produced as well, that I really did enjoy as well too. So anticipating this film, because again, Chad Law is behind this movie, I was very much looking forward to the movie. Having seen the film, and at this point right now, I've seen the movie a total of 6 times ever since it was released on Tubi, which again, this movie is a Tubi original. I can truthfully say that I really did enjoy this film a great fucking deal. There is so much about this movie that I will be getting into here, but I will say right now that I will not be getting into any spoilers with this review at all whatsoever, because even though when I was watching the movie, you can kind of see where some things are starting to unfold and where it's going to be heading into. It's almost written in the wall for you, if you will. I will decide not to talk about those little areas that will not say ruin the movie for you, but I would prefer just to have you just watch it if you hadn't seen it yet and see how things start to unfold, because this movie is pretty much a straightforward action narrative that is a throwback to the 80s and 90s film that I grew up watching, that I know that Chad's a very big fan of as well too. And it is very much a film of that era. And the fact that you also have Theo Rossi, which I'll be getting into in a little bit about his performance in this movie. He wasn't the ideal guy that I would think of for a role of this sort, but he truly did win me over here, which again, I'll get into in a little bit with this review here. But again, I'll get into the plot synopsis, no spoilers, and then I'll get into my positives, my negatives, and then my rating. A hard-living bounty hunter captures a wise-ass criminal, but then the two must work together to evade the crooked cops and trigger happy mercenaries trying to kill them both. And that right there is the film in a nutshell. So now let's get into my positives. My first positive with this movie is that, as I mentioned before, this film is basically a throwback to the old school 80s and action 90 films, where in this case, it's two guys who are complete opposite spectrum of each other, and they're forced to work together with each other to survive, to get to their destination. Basically a buddy action film. But what's really interesting for me though about this movie is that there's the things that you start to learn along the way as the story progresses, because you pretty much get an idea of what's going on based upon what's being told to you in the beginning of the story. But again, when you start to spend time with the characters, you start to realize what the real story is all about. And then the purpose of their journey actually has a lot more, I would say a lot more heart, a lot more merit, if you will. But at the same time, because these two characters actually work very well with each other, even though they start off in a rough spot in the beginning of the story, but as the story progresses on the way, they start to form a bond that it's a forced situation, but it's a very well-earned relationship at the end of the day when the story starts to escalate from there. And that's a lot of props to Theo Rossi and I forget the guy's name again, Shane Paul McGhie, who play Theo plays Mal Cooper, and then McGhie plays the character of Jake Gordon. So the whole story with the character of Jake Gordon is that Mal has got to, who's a bounty hunter, has to find this guy Gordon, to bring him to court in time for a case that is where the character of Beaumont, played by Tretch, is being charged for a crime. And then we come to find out what's really going on, which is why I thought the story was quite interesting when you start to learn along the way the reasons for why his character, in this case Gordon, is being sought after to be killed, so that way he doesn't make his the court case in time. And due to the fact that we have Cooper, who is really good at his job, out there to protect him and doing everything that he can to make sure this guy makes it in time for the court case. It's a very important part of the story, but it really, I'm going to say, in a lot of ways, it adds a lot more merit to the overall story, because when you see how these guys start off with each other, it is start off in a very stereotypical way where they're, in this case, Gordon does not trust Cooper at all, and that he's running away from him because he's thinking that he's trying to kill him, considering what, why he was running away from in the first place, to not make it in court and to not have to testify in court, considering that he's a very key person in this particular case here. But you find out in the story why he's such an important figure in the overall court case. So, seeing that forced situation that we've all seen before, but the way that it's executed, in my opinion, I think worked quite well. And in fact, their chemistry together, I'm going to be honest though, because I remember when I saw the trailer, it's not something unique that we haven't seen before in terms of what's being presented to you with this overall story. But when I think of the character of Mal Cooper, played by Theo Rossi, he's not the type of guy that I think of right away as far as someone that plays up this type of character, because he's definitely a very what you see is what you get, and he definitely does have a really good moral code, if you will, but he's just a really hard person to deal with at times. Has a very a rough exterior about him as well too. But when you look at Theo Rossi, you don't really think of that right away. So I'm not gonna say that I was hesitant about his performance or his portrayal of the character, but I just remember thinking, like, I'm gonna see how it plays along the way to see how his portrayal of this character does for the overall narrative. And I'll be completely frank, I thought he did a really good job. And I'm not making this shit up when I say this here, because the one thing about Theo that I really do appreciate when it comes to his performance is that the fact that his size was never brought up at all, but it's the character, his strength, his inner strength, if you will, where you can see he's very determined. He's also very, he has a very strong persona, and that in a lot of ways, I'm not gonna say makes up for his size, because it's not really what I'm trying to imply here, but it really does add on to the strength of the character, where when people see him, they know right away, for the most part, I would say, that he's someone that you just really don't want to mess with. And you see that in the introduction of the movie when he makes his first capture of a person who's escaping out on bail, where he comes in and negotiates his way, and I say that in quotes, to get into a room to capture one guy, and the way that it's handled and how it's handled, the way he's able to deliver that dialogue to overcome a guy who's clearly much stronger and much taller than him, but uses words as a way to defeat the guy, if you will, to basically break him down, if that makes any sense. And how that's executed in the very beginning of the movie, honestly, I was sold that, okay, this guy can handle his shit. And then when you see the story progress along the way, when he having to fight some people, do obviously quite a few shootouts in this film as well too. And there's even some moments in the movie where there is a slight vulnerability, where he's concerned for his safety, and it's also the case for the safety of Gordon. If you want to, I guess you could say that you want to look at it that way, because I think it is a genuine concern. But there's a vulnerability where that comes out of this character, and virtually the entire time of the movie, he's actually kind of like a stone looking type of guy, where he's just has this very unbreakable balance about him, where you just can't shake the guy at all. And for one moment in the movie, you get to see where his concern, where I'll be frank, it actually does show a quite of a humanity to that character, where you can tell that even though he's very much a very tough person, but he knows his limitations. He's telling in this case, Gordon, we need to make a move now before we die. So little things like that I noticed right away when it comes to his portrayal of the character that I thought worked very effectively for his performance in this film. And then of course the chemistry that he has with the character of Gordon, played by McGhie in this movie. That's another character as well that I was just concerned if his character was going to be kind of what's the best way I could describe it? I wouldn't say stereotypical guy who is, we've seen stories where a guy has to capture another person, but he's always constantly causing problems to having to escape every single time. And it does happen quite a few times in the movie in the very beginning. But then there's a turn in the film where he's actually being handcuffed, where he does make an escape, but when Cooper wakes up and sees that the guy's not in the hotel room anymore after he's already captured him, wondering where the guy went, thinking that he escaped, you see that Gordon's making his way back and say, hey, I got some donuts for us here. And then there's a whole shootout that occurs. For some reason, I remember distinctly thinking, like, this is the part of the character that I really do appreciate right away, where you're not going to see the same tropes we've seen before. It was introduced like that in the beginning, but then as the story progresses along the way, you start to see that shift and change of the character, where he's not going to be problematic in that sense. So considering the movie is just under 90 minutes long, I think that was very fitting to go down that route. But at the same time, we've seen that stuff before on more than one occasion, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. But in this particular case here, you get to see that this character is not going to be a problem in that respect. And he even points it out as well too, after that whole shootout occurred, when he was bringing back donuts after escaping from his handcuffs, that he says to Cooper, he's like, hey, I'm sticking with you. He's like, yeah, I know. So we get that established pretty early on. And then as the story progresses along the way, you get to see where the character of Gordon does earn the respect of Cooper in a altercation that happens between them after his car crash, which is actually a pretty cool scene in my opinion. But after that car crash had occurred and they're going at it with one another, you could see that Cooper is respecting Gordon for standing up for himself, that he's just not this pushover. He's just a guy that knows how to handle himself, not just with his words, but also with his physicality, if you will. And you can see that, okay, I can respect this guy. I know this guy can take care of himself, so I'm not concerned this guy's going to be a liability. And you can pick that up right away once the little incident in that moment of the film had occurred. And I actually appreciate that a great deal, that all the familiar tropes we've seen before, and there are plenty of in this movie, I'm not denying that at all, but just those aspects of those tropes we've seen before is not a thing in this movie, where they are fully aware of the situation that they're in and they having to work together. It's a priority for them to have to get through this here. And I actually love that. And it actually worked considering the circumstances they're dealt with here and how they formed that bond, if you will, to the point where even Gordon points out later on in the movie, without revealing much about the film, that he referred to Cooper as his family, which I thought was very, very well done, in my opinion. Now, I will also point out too, when it comes to the action sequences in this film, I will say that, again, when I'm saying this here, I hope it doesn't come off the wrong way. This is nothing new that we haven't seen before. It's just the way that it's executed that makes the film enjoyable in that capacity there. And I can truthfully say that I mentioned before that there's a scene that involved a car crash that I actually thought was handled quite well, considering how it was all put together. And then the fight scene that occurs after the fact, and the additional shootouts that occur throughout the narrative as well too, I thought, it was handled quite well. And in fact, I'll be frank, I thought it was quite enjoyable, even though we haven't seen this before. It's something new that we haven't seen before. It's just the way that it's handled in each of the respective sequences that lead up to it and the events that occur after the fact, that I honestly think that everything that has been built up to those moments and then the events that occur after the fact is a very well earned moment in the film, where the shootout sequences that occur, although they can be rather short, but it's still quite fun, at least for me personally. And then I will also point out too, when it comes to the villain, without really getting into the villain story too much here, but this is not a gripe in the movie, but you could tell right away, almost in the very beginning, who the bad guy really is. And especially as the story progresses along the way, you could pretty much figure it out. At least I certainly did. So when it came to the reveal of who the villain was, I wasn't surprised by it at all. But I think because of the performance that we get from the actor that plays the villain in this movie, there was a lot of gravitas that they were able to deliver as far as the reasons for why they do it. And it's nothing new that we haven't heard before, but it's just, again, it's all about the deliverance of those respective performances and the purposes behind their reasons for why they did what they did. And again, nothing new we haven't seen before, but can I still connect with the overall story, especially when it came to the reveal? Yes, I certainly did. And something else too I want to point out as well, as far as the positive is concerned, I'm going to point out the directing under Jared Cohn. I was not really familiar with his work at all, but when I actually looked into his IMDb page, there was actually one movie that I did see, I think a few years ago, that was a movie that he had done for Asylum, which I forgot the name of the film up top of my head. I think it's like Lockup or something like that. It dealt with a bunch of women who were in a prison. And I remember I saw this on Pluto TV on the Asylum channel. And I thought the film was okay. I didn't really, honestly, I kind of paid attention to it. I was kind of in it. I was just playing in the background, but I didn't realize the amount of nudity that was also in the film as well too at that time. But when I saw it, I was like, okay, so I didn't put much thought into it at that time. So I had found out he had directed that movie, and having seen that film, which I wasn't a really big fan of, but seeing this movie now, I thought he did a really good job with the overall direction of the story when it came to pacing the film and picking out the shots. The cinematography I thought was quite well as well too, in my opinion. And then again, I'm going to go back here to Chad Law and the co-writer of this movie too, and I have to write down the name here, Gary Charles. So both Chad and Gary, who wrote the script for this movie, I think did a really good job. The humor in this film, in my opinion, worked very, very well, because again, the actors that are saying these lines here, whether it be improvised or straight from the script, I think they did a really good job when it came to the delivery of these lines here, because there's really no one-liners in this movie. It's more, well, I guess you could say there is, because there's one scene in the beginning of the film where Cooper has to capture this one guy, and then the lady who's running these card games where he had to capture this guy was telling him, hey, you're really good at your job. You know, if whenever you're done with this bullshit here, you can come work for me. And he says one line, which he kind of more or less says once or twice in the rest of the film, where he says, I like the bullshit, and then moves on. But just the way that it was executed, in my opinion, I actually thought worked quite well. And it worked for me, and I thought it was quite hilarious at the same time. I remember laughing out loud the first time I saw it. But just the overall humor in this film, it's not a comedy movie, but it definitely does have very good comedic moments that I think were infused quite well with the overall narrative without creating any sort of unbalance with the overall story, where it felt like it was one more over the other. It was actually evened out quite well and paced quite beautifully, in my opinion, as well, too. So for me, that's going to be the end of my pause, because there's a lot more that I can get into here, but that's going to be more in that spoiler territory here. But I will say that I really thought this movie was quite enjoyable, a great, fun film, in my opinion, that I do plan on going back to revisit on more than one occasion, because I've already seen this movie over 6 times at this point in preparation to review, but I just kept going back because I just didn't love the film that much, and that is no bullshit here as well. So that's me, the end of my positives. So now let's get into my negatives. I do have some negatives with this movie, but the negatives that I have with this film aren't necessarily issues that I had with the movie in itself. It more or less has to deal with just certain expositions that we get with certain characters. Like, for example, in the movie, Gordon, played by McGhie, you find out that he has a fiance, and how he was discovered by Cooper trying to track him down. He reveals that, your fiance, in your file, it says you had 2 girlfriends and a fiance. So I just questioned your fiance. She revealed to me where you would be at, or something to that effect, if I recall correctly. And, he's meeting up with this one girl at this hotel that he was trying to get some from, that he had asked her to do something for him, which he ended up getting for him. And then when you learn about his background, for some reason, I felt like I actually wanted to learn more about that, where he has a fiance. What happened to that relationship? Like, it's never mentioned again after the fact. And I felt like for some reason that was actually quite integral, but it seemed like, again, considering the circumstance that we are dealt with this movie, that it wasn't really a major necessity for the overall narrative to have to go back and revisit that. But I do remember distinctly thinking, especially when you learn about this guy, Gordon, how he really is, as the story progresses along the way, he really is a nice person, a really good guy at that, despite the fact he kind of comes off as kind of in a way, like a selfish player, if you will. That's kind of more or less the first impression you get off of him. But learning how he really is as the story progresses, where you learn about more of his background, you come to find that he's a really nice guy. And I'm thinking to myself, well, he's married, or he's about to get married. What about that part of the relationship when it comes to the women in this case? We kind of get a little bit of that in the movie, but I always felt like that's something I would have liked to revisit, especially towards the end of the film. So that's one nitpick, but it's not a major one by any means. It was just one that I can easily look over, because I enjoyed everything else that was going on after the fact as well. But I do remember coming back and watching the film that always stuck out for me. But as far as everything else is concerned, I mean, I don't have anything really major that sticks out for me that really where I had a problem with the film. It was just more those little minor details of exposition that we get, in this case with Gordon. And then I will point out too, when it comes to the villain, that there is one part of the character story that this particular villain shares about why they did what they did. Again, this is just more about, I want to see a little bit more of that, but the exposition that we more or less got the whole story in a nutshell, so it really wasn't necessary. But it's one of those things that I wish that, if given the opportunity to have more time developed, we probably could have seen a bit more backstory to that. I would appreciate to see, but it didn't make or break the film by any means. But it's little things like that comes to mind as far as my negatives concerned. So nothing really major that sticks out for me at all that diluted the movie for me or that ruined it for me. In fact, those negatives I pointed out here before weren't really a factor at all. I still enjoyed the film a great deal. It's a film that I do plan on going back and revisit on more than one occasion. I really do enjoy this film a great deal, as I mentioned before. So for me, that's going to be in my negatives. So now let's get into my rating. So as you already know, I do love this movie. I'm a very big fan of Chad's work when it comes to the various films he's worked on. There's quite a few other films that I'm also anticipating that's coming out later this year with Chad's involvement in those respective films. I'm a person now that, because I've seen, in this case, Chad's track record, I always anticipate his work, because of the work that I've come across here, for the most part, I'm a very big fan of when it comes to his writing, his overall involvement with the projects here. Like, Daylight Sin I think is one of his best films he's written, and one of the films that he's been able to been a part of here. Section 8 was a film that I really did enjoy a great deal. I own that movie now as well, so once in a while I go back and visit it to watch it. But having seen the Getback, to me, this is one of those films that makes me appreciate the fact that we have people out there that are fans of the genre and would like to revisit that era, but add something different to it to make it, and I wouldn't say unique, but just more in a sense enjoyable for, in this case, today's audience, where people can still enjoy the film for what it is, but at the same time, there's a lot of heart to the movies, and you have great actors who are delivering strong performances in a role that we've seen before a million times, but just do something uniquely different for them. In this case, like Theo Rossi is not the guy that I would think of to play the character of Mal Cooper. He's someone that I would think of like more like a Stallone, or someone that has much more of like a bigger physicality behind them that would fit that type of role. But instead we get someone who's the opposite spectrum of that, but still delivers a very strong performance for a character of this sort, and does a really good convincing job at that as well too. So for me, I'm going to say this movie is a solid cheers. And those are my thoughts on the film. If you have seen the movie, let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. And as I said before, this movie is a Tubi original. It's available for free on the platform. I'll make sure I have the link in the description down below for you guys to check out the film. I highly recommend you guys check it out, especially if you're a big fan of the action genre. I would love to hear your thoughts, again, in the comment section down below. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the NRW. Make sure you guys share, like a video, hit the notification bell while you're down there as well. And also, don't forget to follow NRW on social media, on Instagram, New Release Wednesdays, on Facebook, Nerds Rule the World, and on Twitter at the NRW. You can follow me on my social media account on Instagram, You're So Cool with Rob Medina, on Twitter, You're So Cool with WRM, and also on Facebook, simply just Rob Medina. And until then, guys, I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Stay safe out there, and cheers.